Our notes tonight are about writing our Constitution, and they're broken up into two parts. We know from our earlier set of notes that our first government is not the Constitution. Our first government is the Articles of Confederation. And we also know that there were a lot of problems with the Articles of Confederation, that the national government was simply too weak to get a lot of things done. And so our founding fathers meet again in 1787 to try to fix the Articles. And before long, they decide, let's not even bother with fixing them, let's just get rid of them and write a new government. So they set out to write what becomes the Constitution of the United States. And so our notes are going to look at two different parts. The first part is in regards to creating the Congress, or the lawmaking, the legislative branch of the government. The Constitutional Convention is held in 1787, and you get 55 guys from 12 different states. Rhode Island refused to send anybody. They're the smallest of the states, and they didn't want to get rid of the Articles, which you can see why, right? They're a small state. They want to hold on to their power. All of these delegates were white men who were fairly wealthy and owned property. So it really wasn't like a very diverse group of delegates. There were some important ideas that influenced these delegates as they got to work creating our new government. One was separation of powers. And because of this, they set up the new government to reflect what was already built into all of the state governments. 3 separate branches: a legislative or a lawmaking branch, the executive branch, whose job is to enforce the laws, and the judicial branch, whose job is to interpret the laws and to settle any disputes that come up. Another important idea that influenced these writers of the Constitution was checks and balances. So we split the government into 3 different groups, and then we give each branch the ability to check or to block the powers of the other branches to make sure that no one branch gets too powerful. So if the president starts getting too powerful, the other 2 branches have a way to block him and to keep him in line. Now, when these 55 men get to the Constitution, they don't show up in total agreement, right? There's a lot of things they're going to argue about. So we're going to look in particular at 3 big issues that these delegates had to address. The first one had to do with representation, or how should seats in Congress be given out. Under the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states were equal. They all got 1 vote. So, some folks arrive to the Constitutional Convention from Virginia, and they already have a plan in place. Very wisely, it's called the Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan said, let's change it up. Let's do it differently. Let's have 2 houses of Congress. And in each one, we'll give out seats based on how many people live in your state. This would give states that had a lot of people more votes and more power than states with only a few people. So you can imagine the big states like Virginia really like this plan. Like, hooray, let's do this. You can imagine small states weren't very wild about it. So the small states came up with a different plan. And theirs was called the New Jersey Plan, because it was put forth by New Jersey. And theirs was basically, let's keep what we have under the Articles. Let's have 1 house of Congress, and each state will get the same number of seats because each state is independent. We're all equal. Even though some states have more people, we're all equal. And this issue gets really, really heated, goes back and forth. And in some cases, it gets really close to ruining the whole Constitutional Convention. People threatened to walk out. So the solution was a compromise, right? We've got a problem, and so we need a solution. We need both sides to work together to come up with something in the middle that both sides can agree to. And this solution gets the name the Great Compromise. In the Great Compromise, we decided there will be two houses of Congress. The first will be called the House of Representatives, and it will give out seats based on population. So bigger states get more seats. So the big states like Virginia liked this. In the Senate, all of the states would be represented equally. 2 senators for each state, no matter how big or how small your state is. So you can see, neither side got everything they wanted, but they both got a little bit of what they wanted. A second really important issue that was brought up was, what about slaves? Should slaves count as part of your population? States that had a lot of slaves wanted slaves to count because that would give them more seats in the House of Representatives. States that didn't have slaves said, no way. There's no way slaves should count. They're not free citizens. You don't treat them like citizens. You shouldn't get to count them. The solution gets the name the 3/5 Compromise. Slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. Put another way, you would take the total number of slaves in a state and you would count 3/5 of them. So if a state had 5,000 slaves, 3,000 of them would be counted. And that number would be added to the state's population, and it would count for representation and also for taxes. So both sides get a little bit of what they want. Neither side gets everything of what they want. Part 2 of the notes shifts to the presidency. And we have to create this because if you remember, in the Articles of Confederation, there is no president. So we're having to create this whole new job for the Constitution. And as I just said, one of the biggest problems with the Articles of Confederation was that there really wasn't an executive. There was no executive branch. There was no president. And we did that on purpose because right after the war, everybody was worried that a powerful president would act like a king. And that continues to remain, a worry today, that if the president gets too powerful, he can almost be more like a monarch. So, for example, here's a political cartoon of Andrew Jackson, who comes later, but still gives you that idea of, people felt like, if the president gets too powerful, he'll be like a king. And so we didn't want that. We had just gotten rid of a king. So we didn't want to put a big, strong president that might become like a king. But that also meant that nobody could enforce Congress's laws. So when we were creating the executive branch, because we needed someone to enforce the laws, the writers of the Constitution had to figure out some questions, like how long should the president serve? Could he be reelected? Should there be one president or maybe a committee? Should there be like 2 or 3 people who work together? What they finally decide on is that we're just going to have one president. The president will serve for 4 years, and the president can be reelected. Which leads us to our last big issue out of the 3 we're discussing. Who should pick the president? Some people argued that the American people should directly elect the president. They should vote for the president, and whoever gets the most votes wins. Others said, well, actually, no. Congress should pick the president because the American people might not know enough about the different candidates to make an informed decision. Right? This is 1787. It's not like they have instant news like we do today. How will a farmer down in Georgia know enough about somebody from Massachusetts who's running for president to know whether they should vote for him or not? So they go, maybe we should just let Congress pick. And so the solution is what is called the Electoral College. And again, it's a compromise. Neither side gets everything they want. They both kind of get a little bit of what they want. So here's how the Electoral College works at a very basic level. The people will get to pick the president, but they don't get to directly pick the president. They're going to pick the president through an indirect method called the Electoral College. The people, when they go to vote, they will be actually voting for electors, and the electors will have the final say in who will be the president. So you're voting for people who will get to vote for president. So that's why when you see elections and you see maps and images like this with red states and blue states, these numbers are all about the Electoral College. And they tell you how many electors each state has. This is from the 2008 election. So when you see this, think, okay, this is the Electoral College, right? This is how many electors each state has, and these people get to vote for who the president will be. And we'll talk about this a little bit more specifically when we read about it in the book.